right. The sin offering. This is what you offer when you have violated one of God's commandments. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, when anyone sins unintentionally and does what is forbidden in any of the Lord's commands." Now, when they say unintentional sin here, they're talking more about sinning in the spur of the moment or sinning in the heat of the moment, not necessarily planning to sin ahead of time. Like when you say something mean or something, or you do something, and just your passion overtakes you. You weren't necessarily planning on committing a sin, you just did it. You may not even be aware that you did it. Ignorance is not an excuse for sin. You may have broken a law without realizing you have broken a law, but you can't use that as an excuse to protest your innocence. Innocence and ignorance are not the same thing. If you're ignorant of the sin, that doesn't mean you're guilty of not breaking it. That doesn't mean you're not guilty of breaking it. Just like today, you could say, well, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that, but the courts aren't going to listen to you. That's not an acceptable defense in our court of law today, even. So it's like you cannot use that as a defense, saying, I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to do that. So sometimes we might be talking about sin that you're unaware of, but this also covers sin that you just do and you aren't planning on doing. It just happens, kind of like the heat of the moment. We find out way over here in James, in the New Testament. James defines sin like this. This is in James chapter 1, verse 13. We'll start in verse 13 here. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each of us is tempted when, by his own evil desire, he is dragged away and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. So that means taking action on your evil desire. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. So when you're enticed by something that you want, and you take action on that. Take action to achieve that. That's when you sin. That's how we sin. That's a process. You can see it all the way back in the garden. Yes, the serpent put the thought in Eve's head about wanting to eat the fruit of the tree. But he didn't actually force her to eat the fruit of the tree, or Adam for that matter. She looked at the fruit, saw that it was pleasing and desirable, and she ate it. So she was enticed by her desire to eat that fruit. Now yes, the thought was put in her head by the serpent. But she was enticed by her own desire to eat that fruit, and she enticed her husband to eat the fruit. I don't know if he ate the fruit because it was pleasing or desirable to him to eat the fruit, or if he ate the fruit because he was enticed by his wife to eat the fruit. I don't know. She was enticed by the fruit. I don't know what he was enticed by, but he was enticed by something. And that's what causes sin. And that can happen in the spur of the moment. It doesn't have to be planned or premeditated. It doesn't even necessarily have to be done with a defiant attitude towards God. It's just done. It just happens. When you're dragged away and enticed, and you take action upon that, you commit a sin. So here's what you do when this happens. And in this case, this category of sin, we're going to have a variety of different kinds of people who commit sins, and slightly different steps to this offering, depending on what category of people you belong to. You're going to have the priest, you're going to have the priests, you're going to have the community, and you're going to have a leader, like an elder, a tribal elder, or later on maybe a king, and then just a regular person in the community. So there are 4 different kinds of people, 4 different social strata, basically, of people that are covered here, and depending on where you fit in one of these 4 categories of people, the approach to the sin offering is going to be slightly different. If the anointed priest sins, bringing guilt on the people, he comes first because his responsibility is the highest, and so therefore his sin is the most serious and has potentially the most corrupting influence on the rest of the people. So we have to take that most seriously. He must bring to the Lord a young bull without defect, as a sin offering for the sin he has committed. He is to present the bull. Now that would be the chief animal to be sacrificed. We talked about the different kinds of animals. We saw back in the burnt offering, if he's offering a burnt offering from the herd, which is the cattle, this would be a male, a bull without defect. And this is the prize animal to offer, a young, perfect male bull. So this is the most significant sin of all the different categories of people. This is the most significant category of someone who is sinning, so therefore we need the top line animal for this. A young bull he must bring to the Lord a young bull without defect as a sin offering for the sin he has committed. He is to present the bull at the entrance to the tent of meeting before the Lord. There's that presentation idea again. Like this animal now is no longer the worshipers. It now belongs to God. It's being presented to God to be dedicated to his use. He is to lay his hand on its head and slaughter it before the Lord. This is the priest himself doing this, by the way. Then the anointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood and carry it into the tent of meeting. He is to dip his finger into the blood and sprinkle some of it 7 times before the Lord in front of the curtain of the sanctuary. Now this blood is the atonement. This blood is covering the sin. Remember, the blood, for sin, without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sin. It's the blood of Christ that forgives our sins. So this symbolic blood covering is covering this priest's sin. And he's dripping it in front of the curtain of the sanctuary, so way in the heart of the sanctuary itself. The priest shall then put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of fragrant incense. Remember that we have the altar of burnt offering, but we also have the altar of incense. And remember, incense stands for prayer. So the incense of the altar of incense is the altar of prayers, essentially. So he's putting some of the blood in the curtain in front of the most holy place, and some of it is going on the altar of fragrant incense. It is before the Lord in the tent of meeting. The rest of the bull's blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering at the entrance to the tent of meeting. That's where it usually goes. He shall remove all the fat from the bull of the sin offering, the fat that covers the inner parts or is connected to them, both kidneys with the fat on them near the loins, and the covering of the liver, which he'll remove with the kidneys, just as the fat is removed from the ox, sacrificed as a fellowship offering, which we just got done reading about. Then the priest shall burn them on the altar of burnt offering. But the hide of the bull and all its flesh, as well as the head and legs, and the inner parts and offal, that is, all the rest of the bull, he must take outside the camp to a place ceremonially clean, where the ashes are thrown, and burn it in a wood fire on the ash heap. If the whole Israelite community sins unintentionally, and does what is forbidden in any of the Lord's commands, even though the community is unaware of the matter, they are guilty. When they become aware of the sin they committed, I don't know how they do this, I guess someone has to bring it to their attention. The assembly must bring a young bull as a sin offering and present it before the tent of meeting. The elders of the community are to lay their hands on the bull's head before the Lord, and the bull shall be slaughtered before the Lord. Then the anointed priest, I'm not sure who does the slaughtering in this case, because that's a passive tense verb. The priest or the elders, I'm not entirely sure. Then the anointed priest is to take some of the bull's blood into the tent of meeting. He did this for himself back when he was the offending sinner. Now he's doing it on behalf of these community of sinners. Then the anointed priest, he shall dip his finger into the blood and sprinkle it before the Lord 7 times in front of the curtain, same place as before. He is to put some of the blood on the horns of the altar that is before the Lord in the tent of meeting. The rest of the blood he shall pour. So this, instead of previously we sprinkle some of it in front of the curtain, and then put some of it on the altar for a fragrant incense. This time we're sprinkling it in front of the curtain and then putting it on the altar of where am I? The horns of the altar. I guess it's the same altar. The horns of the altar that's before the Lord. I'm not sure. Either the altar of incense, the altar of burnt offering. I'm not clear on that. The rest of the blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering. That's the burnt, so I'm assuming the other one is the altar of incense. even though it didn't actually say that. But he shall remove all the fat from it and burn it on the altar. I wouldn't make a very good priest, would I? If I were a Hebrew priest, I would be failing in my job here. He shall remove all the fat from it and burn it on the altar, and do with this bull just as he did with the bull for the sin offering. In this way the priest will make atonement for them, the whole community, and they will be forgiven. Then he shall... Now they're not being forgiven on the basis of the blood of this bull. They're being forgiven on the basis of the blood of Christ, which is going to happen about 1,500 years from now. But God knows that's going to happen, and he is forgiving these sins now on the basis of his knowledge of what's going to happen then. But they are to do this in faithfulness, to trust in their trust for God, that he... Well, I don't know if they necessarily believe this bull is taking away their sin. At this point in time, they may have believed that. I think later on, maybe they began to wonder whether or not this was actually working. One way or another, this bull's blood is not actually forgiving them of their sins. But their faithfulness in following... This is the way he has given them to be forgiven. So their faithfulness in following this ordinance, this commandment, is acceptable to God, and he is forgiving their sins on the basis of the blood of Christ on Calvary. Then he shall take the bull outside the camp and burn it as he burned the first bull. This is a sin offering for the community. When a leader sins unintentionally, might be like a tribal elder or chieftain, later on maybe a king. When a leader sins unintentionally and does what is forbidden in any of the commands of the Lord his God, he is guilty. When he is made aware of the sin he committed, he must bring as his offering a male goat. So now we're downgrading from a bull to a goat, without defect. He is to lay his hand on the goat's head and slaughter it at the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered before the Lord. It is a sin offering. Then the priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour out the rest of the blood on the base of the altar. So they're not taking this all the way to the curtain in front of the Holy of Holies. He shall burn all the fat on the altar as he burned the fat of the fellowship offering. In this way the priest will make atonement for the man's sin, and he will be forgiven. If a member of the community sins unintentionally, so now we're just down to the regular people here, and does what is forbidden in any of the Lord's commands, he is guilty. When he is made aware of the sin he committed, he must bring as his offering for the sin he committed a female goat without defects. So now we're on a female goat. We've gone from a male bull to a male goat to now a female goat. He is to lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and slaughter it at the place of the burnt offering. Then the priest is to take some of the blood with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar, same as before. He shall remove all the fat, just as the fat is removed from the fellowship offering, and the priest shall burn it on the altar as an aroma pleasing to the Lord. So there is a little bit of a sweet fragrance aspect to these sacrifices. Remember, the sweet fragrance, the aroma pleasing to the Lord, means that this offering is acceptable to him. As it fumes up towards him, he smells it, and it smells good to him, because he is his worshiper, his person, his man, the person offering the sacrifice is doing what is pleasing to him. In the previous three sacrifices, the burnt offering, the grain offering, and the fellowship offering, that concept was the central aspect of it. In this one, it's only a minor. Atonement was not the central in the previous three sacrifices, offerings. Atonement is central in this one, and the sweet fragrance is less essential in this one, but still present. By the way, there's going to come a point in time when, instead of these offerings being a fragrant aroma, a sweet savor, pleasing to the Lord, they're going to be a stench in his nostrils, and he's going to hate them and despise them. They're going to still be offering them. And they're going to be doing it according to the rules and the regulations. They're going to be doing it by the letter of the law. But they're not going to be doing it by the spirit of the law. Their hearts are not going to be in it. And so when their hearts are not in it, they saw these offerings, instead of being a sweet savor or a fragrant incense or a pleasing aroma, they're going to be a stench in his nostrils, and he's going to hate them. So that really ultimately is what matters. The actual ritual, the going through the step-by-step process of offering these things, is not ultimately what's important. He has a step-by-step process. He's giving it to them here. But that is not really what he's looking for in these sacrifices. When the people offer these offerings, he's not looking for them just to follow the rules from start to finish. If he brings a lamb as his sin offering, he is to bring a female without defect. He is to lay his hand on its head and slaughter it for a sin offering at the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered. Then the priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. He shall remove all the fat, just as the fat is removed from the lamb of the fellowship offering, and the priest shall burn it on the altar on top of the offerings made to the Lord by fire. In this way the priest will make atonement for him for the sin he has committed, and he will be forgiven. If a person sins, now here we're going to give some instances of the kinds of sins that can be counted in this category. Here's the sorts of things that you can do that make you sinful, make you guilty, and thus require this sin offering. If a person sins because he does not speak up when he hears a public charge to testify regarding something he has seen or learned about, he will be held responsible. Now, we read about that all the way back in Exodus 20. Remember, all of these different laws and ordinances that we read about for the latter part of Exodus all the way to the beginning of Numbers ultimately spin out of these 10 commandments that we got back in Exodus 20. This goes to commandment number 9, you shall not give false testimony about your neighbor. This is a specific way that you can do that. If a person touches anything ceremonially unclean, whether the carcasses of unclean wild animals, or of unclean livestock, or of unclean creatures that move along the ground, even though he is unaware of it, he has become unclean and is guilty. We're going to hear a lot more about this clean and unclean concept as we go. Or if he touches human uncleanness, anything that would make him unclean, even though he is unaware of it, when he learns of it, he will be guilty. Or if a person thoughtlessly takes an oath to do anything, whether good or evil, in any matter one might carelessly swear about, even though he is unaware of it, in any case, when he learns of it, he will be guilty. When anyone is guilty in any of these ways, he must confess in what way he has sinned. And as a penalty for the sin he has committed, he must bring to the Lord a female lamb or goat from the flock as a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for him for his sin. If he cannot afford a lamb, he is to bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons to the Lord as a penalty for his sin, one for a sin offering and the other for burnt offering. He is to bring them to the priest, who shall first offer the one for the sin offering. He is to wring its head from its neck, not severing it completely, and is to sprinkle some of the blood of the sin offering against the side of the altar. The rest of the blood must be drained out at the base of the altar. It is a sin offering. The priest shall then offer the other as a burnt offering in the prescribed way and make atonement for him for the sin he has committed, and he will be forgiven. If, however, he cannot afford 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, he is to bring as an offering for a sin 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour for a sin offering. That is probably about 2 quarts. He must not put oil or incense on it, because it is a sin offering. Oil stands for anointing, and incense stands for prayer. So this is a sin offering. You can't offer those things in your sinful state. He is to bring it to the priest, who shall take a handful of it as a memorial portion and burn it on the altar on top of the offerings made to the Lord by fire. It is a sin offering. In this way, the priest will make atonement for him for any of the sins he has committed, and he will be forgiven. The rest of the offering will belong to the priest, as in the case of the grain offering. Now here down a little bit farther in chapter 6 of Leviticus, we read some more about the sin offering. Starting in 6 verse 24. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to Aaron and his sons, these are the regulations for the sin offering. The sin offering is to be slaughtered before the Lord in the place the burnt offering is slaughtered. It is most holy. The priest who offers it shall eat it. It is to be eaten in a holy place, in the courtyard of the tent of meeting. Whatever touches any of the flesh will become holy. And if any of the blood is splattered on a garment, you must wash it in a holy place. The clay pot the meat is cooked in must be broken. But if it is cooked in a bronze pot, the pot is to be scoured and rinsed with water. The clay pot, the blood will soak through into the clay, and the bronze pot, it won't be, so it can be rinsed out and used again. Any male in a priest's family may eat it. It is most holy. But any sin offering whose blood is brought into the tent of meeting to make atonement in the holy place must not be eaten. It must be burned. I am very glad that we don't have to offer these sacrifices and offerings any longer, aren't you? This would be a lot to have to keep track of all the time. It really would be. Okay. Now, as I said earlier, the book of Leviticus is not arranged linearly. It is arranged like a curve, so to speak, or maybe a peak. Maybe I should say it starts like at a peak, because the middle of the book is the Day of Atonement, and if you put that as like the middle, or maybe the peak, and then you come down on either side, you have like this slope of corresponding sections. On the beginning and end of the book, at the bottom, let's say at the beginning and end, and in this comparison would be kind of at the bottom of the slope, you have ritual laws. The first batch of ritual laws are about sacrifices, which we just got done reading. The second batch of ritual laws are about special days and feasts. Then in the middle sections, you have stuff about the priests, which includes the only little bit of narrative in the book of Leviticus, which is about what happens the day they inaugurated their priesthood. We'll cover that eventually. Then after that, we get to the top sections, which are laws, but purity laws, how to live pure and set apart for God, different from all the nations around them. And then you have the Day of Atonement in the middle. So what I'm going to do here is, instead of continuing on with Leviticus 8, which enters a section about the priests, in fact, we kind of transitioned into that section at the end of Leviticus 7, when we started talking about the priest's share of the sacrifices, the offerings. Leviticus 8 starts talking about the priests, and in particular talks about the ordination of the first batch of priests, Aaron and his 4 sons, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. This is the only part of the Leviticus that could be considered narrative, because the next couple of chapters are going to be talking about events that happened. I'm actually going to skip that section now. As I said before, when I read through the Bible, I don't read it from start to finish in the order it's arranged. I don't even know if it's really meant to be read that way. Okay, we have to arrange it in some way or another, so that's the way we do it. Now, up until now, I've been reading it basically in order. I started with Genesis 1, and I've continued on from there, but the intent is not to read this in the order in which it is written. So I'm not going to be doing that here. I'm going to be skipping to the end of Leviticus and reading the corresponding section about the rituals. So we read about the sacrifices at the beginning of Leviticus. Now we're going to be reading about their feasts and their feasts, well, their feasts basically, and other rituals that make up their sacrificial, their worship system. This is now Leviticus 23. We're starting in Leviticus 23, starting in verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, these are my appointed feasts, the appointed feasts of the Lord, which you are to proclaim as sacred assemblies." Now, we've already read about some of these. We've already read about these in Exodus, briefly. We didn't read about them in much detail. We know about the Sabbath, we know about the Passover, and in Exodus, he did mention briefly some of these other things he wants them to do. Let's see if I can find that section, shall we? It would be before all the tabernacle stuff. Exodus 23 lays out the 3 annual festivals. Starting in verse 14, it says, 3 times a year you are to celebrate a festival to me. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is Passover. We read about that before the Exodus, because that's where it started. And the Feast of Harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering. So we've read about these. Now we're going to read more details about them. So these are my appointed feasts, the appointed feasts of the Lord, which you are to proclaim as sacred assemblies. There are 6 days when you may work, but the 7th is a Sabbath of rest, a day of sacred assembly. You are not to do any work. Wherever you live, it is a Sabbath to the Lord. These are the Lord's appointed feasts, the sacred assemblies you are to proclaim at their appointed times. The Lord's Passover begins at twilight on the 14th day of the first month. We read about that before they left Exodus. That's where it started. On the 15th day of that month, the Lord's Feast of Unleavened Bread begins. For 7 days you must eat bread made without yeast. On the first day, hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. For 7 days, present an offering made to the Lord by fire. And on the 7th day, hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am going to give you, and you reap its harvest, bring to the priest a sheaf of the first grain you harvest. He is to wave the sheaf before the Lord so that it will be accepted on your behalf. The priest is to wave it on the day after the Sabbath, so the first day of the next week. On the day you wave the sheaf, you must sacrifice as a burnt offering to the Lord a lamb a year old without defect, together with its grain offering of 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made to the Lord by fire, a pleasing aroma, and its drink offering of 1/4 of a hin of wine." So some of your offerings were of drinks. "You must not eat any bread or roasted or new grain until the very day you bring this offering to your God. This is to be a lasting ordinance to the generations to come wherever you live." So we interrupted this section about the feasts to introduce that little topic right there. I don't know why. I'm not skilled enough to be able to tell you why that little section gets fitted in there in the middle of all this stuff about feasts. It just is. Okay. From the day after the Sabbath, the day you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, so I guess that's the tie-in there, huh? Count off 7 full weeks. Count off 50 days up to the day after the 7th Sabbath. And then present an offering of new grain to the Lord. From wherever you live, bring 2 loaves. You know what? I'm not ready to do this yet. I'm going to do this later. That's enough of this for tonight. I'll delete this video. Or at least I won't use it.